Nobody inside the Ducati camp expected it, but in the middle of a tense preseason cycle where every detail is dissected, every millisecond measured, one revelation sent shockwaves through the red garage. A revelation not about their multi-time world champion, but about a rider who wasn't even on a MotoGP bike. A pattern began to surface, a riding style so aggressive, so unorthodox, that it challenged the foundations of how Ducati understood braking. And it came from Toprak Razgatlıoğlu. Behind closed doors, some said the Ducati boss was stunned. Others claimed it was merely concern. But one thing became clear. What happened next reshaped the narrative leading into MotoGP 2025. Because the moment Ducati compared Toprak's data to Pecco's, tension rose faster than anyone expected. There was always pressure surrounding Pecco Bagnaia. 2 world titles, an empire built on microscopic precision, and a team counting on him to guide the next era of Ducati dominance. But this preseason felt different. There was a strange buzz around the paddock, an uncomfortable vibration the engineers couldn't quite escape. Inside Ducati, discussions about braking stability had already intensified. The GP25 was evolving into a more aggressive machine, and whispers of fundamental changes created unease even before the first race weekend. But the real disruption didn't come from anything inside MotoGP. It came from a report buried in a stack of cross-series testing data. A report analyzing Toprak Razgatlıoğlu's braking figures during a private superbike session, figures so extreme that Ducati engineers initially assumed the sensors were malfunctioning. They weren't. And when the numbers reached Ducati's leadership, the first layer of tension settled over the team like fog rolling across the pit lane. But what they discovered next made that fog feel like a storm about to break. Behind closed doors, technical analysts began combing through telemetry. Toprak's entry braking performance showed forces beyond what several MotoGP bikes achieved during comparable sections. It wasn't just unusual, it was borderline surreal. His rear tire control under violent deceleration looked almost engineered rather than human. Some said it resembled a stunt rider mixed with a surgeon. Others called it something physics shouldn't allow. The term MotoGP-level braking floated around in private engineering chats, even though he wasn't on a prototype. That alone created a ripple of unease. The idea that a superbike rider could surpass or even pressure the braking dominance of a MotoGP world champion was something few inside Ducati were prepared to entertain. Yet the comparisons started coming anyway, quietly, discreetly, and always with the same conclusion. Toprak's technique was off the scale. One tech insider described it more bluntly: he's doing things we don't even model for MotoGP riders. But the analysis didn't end there. The next revelation made Ducati's leadership realize they might be facing a genuine shift in riding style philosophy. According to rumors circulating inside the paddock, the moment the Ducati boss saw the data, his first reaction was disbelief. The numbers didn't fit modern MotoGP logic. If accurate, they challenged everything Ducati built around Pecco's precise controlled braking approach. The room reportedly went silent. Some insiders claimed there was immediate debate about whether the data was relevant or dangerous. Others said the shock came from how closely Toprak's style aligned with where MotoGP braking trends were heading. One Ducati engineer supposedly remarked, "If this style ever lands on a prototype, we'll have to rethink our entire aero brake philosophy." It wasn't a criticism of Pecco, it was a realization. The future might require a different form of aggression. And that realization grew sharper when Pecco became aware of the comparisons he didn't ask for, but now couldn't avoid. Pecco Bagnaia built his reputation on perfect lines, disciplined braking, and rhythm that almost looked choreographed. His technique was elegant, calculated, the gold standard for MotoGP precision. But in an era where aerodynamics were forcing riders to brake harder, deeper, and more violently than ever before, Toprak became the embodiment of the next evolution. Pecco wasn't threatened by the name, he was threatened by the trend. Because every time analysts publicly praised Toprak's impossible braking, it fueled speculation that the style could infiltrate MotoGP and force existing champions to adapt. And adaptation was the one thing Pecco never rushed. The environment around him shifted. New expectations, new questions, new rivals emerging from outside the sport's borders. And Ducati's internal discussions about future development didn't help. But the real turning point came during a data simulation session that was never meant to leak. What engineers found that day turned pressure into something heavier. During pre-season technical review 3, Ducati engineers evaluated Pecco's braking behavior with the new GP25 configuration. The results highlighted an uncomfortable truth. Pecco's ultra-smooth entries, once his biggest strength, were becoming less effective in a field dominated by hyper-aggressive braking specialists. Not a flaw, but a vulnerability. The GP25 demanded brutality in areas Pecco usually approached with refinement, and that's exactly where Toprak's style thrived. Insiders said Ducati considered adjusting electronics to give Pecco more stability under late braking, changes that would push him toward a more extreme style. But modifying Pecco's natural rhythm carried risks. If they went too far, he could lose the precision that made him champion. Still, Ducati pressed forward, and those internal shifts sparked the next round of tension, this time inside the engineering department itself. For the first time in years, Ducati's engineering staff became split. One group believed the future of MotoGP belonged to riders who braked like Toprak, late, violent, and uncompromising. They pushed for radical development. Another group insisted Ducati must protect Pecco's strengths, not reshape him into something he wasn't. Meetings grew longer, discussions grew sharper, and the looming 2025 competitive landscape added pressure. Aprilia was unlocking absurd cornering stability, KTM was studying aggressive stopping power, and Honda was rebuilding its braking identity from scratch. Every rival was studying the same trend. Hard braking was becoming the battlefield of the future, and Ducati couldn't ignore the fact that the rider leading that revolution wasn't wearing red. But the real shock came when a rumor began circulating, one that changed the tone of every internal meeting that followed. Whispers began to spread that two MotoGP teams, not Ducati, were evaluating the possibility of bringing Toprak into the premier class for 2026. Nothing official, nothing confirmed, but for Ducati, the idea was enough. Because if Toprak entered MotoGP and brought his extreme braking with him, he wouldn't just be a rival, he'd be a disruption. Some analysts suggested Pecco would face a strategic nightmare if both riders ever shared the same track. A contrast of styles so dramatic it could redefine how teams developed their bikes. Those whispers created a different kind of anxiety inside Ducati. Not fear of Toprak himself, but fear of a new era where traditional precision would no longer be enough. And that anxiety grew stronger after one crucial pre-season moment, a moment that proved the Toprak evolution was already starting to spread. At multiple pre-season tests, younger MotoGP riders began experimenting with extreme trail braking techniques. The influence was obvious: deeper entries, more rear tire rotation, and an unmistakable attempt to imitate the Toprak signature. And some of those attempts worked. Ducati's data analysts were the first to notice the trend. A handful of riders were pushing braking zones beyond what had been considered realistic 2 years earlier. MotoGP wasn't waiting for Toprak to arrive. The sport was already evolving toward him. Ducati could feel the ground shifting beneath them. What was once Pecco's territory, disciplined, controlled braking, was transforming into a world of aggression, chaos, and razor-thin margins. The future was coming whether they wanted it or not, and what Ducati decided next would define everything about their 2025 season. After weeks of internal analysis, Ducati leadership made their move. They approved a more aggressive braking-focused development path for the GP25, a direction closer to the modern trend and closer to the kind of violence Toprak had mastered for years. It wasn't designed to copy him, but it was undeniably influenced by the wave he created. Pecco suddenly faced a motorcycle that demanded a sharper edge, a harsher rhythm, a step outside his comfort zone. It wasn't a punishment, it was a necessity. But every evolution comes with a cost. Some insiders said Pecco accepted the challenge with determination. Others claimed he felt uneasy, aware that the shifting landscape could eventually squeeze him into adapting faster than ever before. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. A new era was forming, a style revolution was underway, and Ducati was no longer shaping the future alone. They were reacting to it. As MotoGP 2025 approached, the biggest question no longer revolved around lap times, upgrades, or preseason form. It revolved around a simple, unsettling thought. If this is what Toprak can do without a prototype, what happens when he finally rides one?